Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the second of our fall workshops for the Transformations Community of Practice. So I'm Bruce Goldstein. I'm a professor here in the Environmental Design and Environmental Studies program here at CU Boulder. And I'm also director of the NetWeaver Network, which is a learning community for transformative change making. So I think, like so many people in this community, we wear multiple hats: practice and reflection. We're academics of various kinds, reflective practitioners. So I'm coordinating the Transformations Community of Practice. I'm working with Ashley Lane. She's here with a team of discussants from the CU Boulder Masters of the Environment program. Welcome, discussants. Thanks for getting up so early. So the Transformations Community of Practice, if you have had a chance to look online, it's an effort to build our community of transformations practitioners and academics and pracademics. We've held 4 conferences over the last 8 years in Oslo and Stockholm and Dundee and Santiago. And fun places, and we were going to go to Barcelona next year, but 2020 happened. So now we're convening a global virtual conference, which is going to be on the June 17th and 18th next year, which we will invite you to next week. We probably have your email. You can turn on the transformation list for free. Just in case you aren't, please pass it along to us through the website, or send us a private chat. Ashley, you can send Ashley a private chat. So that's going to be a really interestingly designed and excellent workshop. Conference, I think. Going to have recorded sessions, and then there's going to be curated live conversation. It's going to take place in 3 different time zones. So there's going to be a Asia, a Europe, and a South America live sessions, and it's being conducted in association with Future Earth, who's given us access to their excellent online platform. So we'll send you more information about that soon, and we're posting everything to our website, which is transformationscommunity.org, which we can even put in chat. And by the way, I see names are accumulating there and locations. It's kind of fun to see where everyone's from, so feel free to put your name and your location there as well. So the Transformations webpage at transformationscommunity.org also has information about the arts, transformations in the arts, and we're starting up an events and news page. We're also listing our organizational partners there. So if your organization is interested in being a partner with the Transformations Community of Practice, just drop us an email from the site or send Ashley an email. We're also sponsoring other workshops in addition to the conference in 2021. And we're interested in collaborating with other members of the community in other virtual events. So if you're doing something that you'd like to have members of the Transformations community, folks who have attended the previous conferences, be a part of, or would like to partner with us in implementation, please get in touch with us. We're really open to a diversity of opportunities during COVID, using a huge variety of platforms and ways to interact and really get engaged. The emphasis of these workshops and our entire community is on practice. And so we're all about learning useful methods and tools and techniques. Well, we still recognize there's nothing as useful as a good theory. So we work both sides of the aisle. So do get in touch with us if you have something that you'd like to share, put on the website, or an activity that you'd like to co-sponsor. So our workshop today is entitled Assessing Food Systems Sustainability, and it's presented by Johanna and Theresa. And they're gonna teach us all about food sustainability assessment and mapping, and then we're gonna break out and examine a specific food system and conduct the first steps of a participatory food system assessment and identify some leverage points for change. So I'd like to welcome our presenters. Thank you for offering this, and hand it over to them to begin.
Thank you, Bruce, and also welcome from our side. We are very much looking forward to do this today with you. I will just give a quick introduction about the 2 of us. Could I share my screen, Ashley?
Hang on 1 second.
Or I can just go ahead
Yeah.
and then.
I made you the host, so you should be able to do it, I think.
Okay. So yeah, as Bruce said already, we will talk about food sustainability assessments and the participatory method, how to assess them and rate them, and how we can find entry points for food system transformation in there. And so I would quickly introduce the two of us. We are both senior research scientists at the Center for Development and Environment at the University of Bern, which is the competence center for sustainable development at the University of Bern in Switzerland. Our backgrounds is both geographers, and Johanna lives in Bolivia. She is in our regional office there. And her research interests are mainly in food sustainability, agroecology, agroforestry, but also in food justice and in political ecology. I myself live in Switzerland, and my research interests are in food systems transformation, in justice issues around food systems, then sustainable development in general, and also I like to engage in different transdisciplinary methods. And with that, I would like to hand over to Johanna with the first input on the method and what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Theresa. Can I share my screen? Is that possible?
I think that Theresa might have to make you the host. I'm sorry.
Can you do that, Theresa? So I am not in Bolivia currently. I'm now in the Black Forest. I went back because of the whole situation, the health system in Bolivia and so on. But usually I live and work there since 5 years because we have a regional office there and we have several projects about food system sustainability and sustainable agriculture. And now let's see if I can share. Yes. So just 1 second. There it is. Can you see my screen now? Yes, good, okay. So I would like to give a quick introduction to the concept of food system sustainability that we co-developed at the University of Bern with several partners in Global South. And then I also would like to introduce the method, how it works, and some examples where we applied it. And then Theresa will introduce us to the case study we were working at today. She will introduce us to the group work, and then we will have the group work and then come back to the plenary. So that's basically the plan for today. So I want to start about, with some conceptual approach to food systems. So first, we know that we have lots of problems in the global food system, or also if we conceptualize many smaller food systems, the problems are there. So we have loss of bio and agrobiodiversity, water pollution, soil degradation. We have climate change, which is strongly influenced by food systems. We have land use change, vulnerability, inequality, health problems, so you name it. Many, many problems are related to food systems. And if we look at that from the planetary boundaries perspective, of course, this is a concept that can be strongly criticized, but I like it because it reminds us about the limits that we are overstepping and where food systems are really one major driver. For example, if you have seen last year's Eat Lancet report, which also can be criticized, but they said that, or they very prominently called attention to how food systems are overstepping planetary boundaries. So here you can see climate change is one, then biosphere integrity with the biodiversity loss, land system change. If you think of all the forest fires that are happening, biogeochemical flows, when we think about dead zones in the ocean. So these things are all strongly related to how we produce, how we consume. So if we think about industrial agriculture as an example, that covers like 80% of all agricultural land with mainly monocultures, then causes up to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and uses most of the fresh water and also most of the fossil fuels and energy used in agriculture. While it produces less than half of the food actually, because it produces biomass, not necessarily food, right? And then also we have lost up to 90% of all agrobiodiversity that has existed on the planet due to the uniformization of agriculture, and also more than 20% of all arable land to soil degradation. So it's really, really severe problems. Then also this year's report on state of food security and nutrition in the world by the United Nations that found that like we are really not on track to achieve Sustainable Development Goal 2, which is zero hunger, much less the others, which is, for example, sustainable or responsible consumption and production. So it's on the contrary, the number of hungry is increasing again since 2014 to an official 690 million in 2020, which is likely very much underestimated. Then according to them, like 8.9% of the world's populations are suffering from hunger, but probably it's much more, up to about 1/3. The problem of malnutrition, now we have more overweight and obese people than hungry people, or a similar number at least. And then what's also very striking is that healthy diets are 4 to 5 times more expensive on average than unhealthy diets and just unaffordable for more than half of the world's population. So then they call for better policies for affordable, healthy diets. And then of course, the big question is how can that happen? How can that be achieved? And what we are looking at in our research, in our project, is possible paradigm shifts in how we understand not only food security, but more than that, food sustainability. So we thought that really a paradigm shift is needed. It cannot be achieved within the currently predominant model, but we need a different way of approaching food systems. And then when we developed our concept that we're working with now, we thought that we need several dimensions that we have to look at. Of course, we need food security, but not just the availability of calories. We know that there's more than enough in absolute numbers, but it's also accessibility, it's also utilization, it's also stability, like a more holistic concept of food security. But then we also need to look at food in terms of human rights, because it's a right in many constitutions. Then its environmental impacts have to be less. Environmental, food systems have to do better in environmental terms, have to become less dependent on fossil fuels and so on. We need to look at poverty and inequality, because we know that this is something that's like a key reason for food insecurity. And then food systems need to be resilient to climate change, but also to price fluctuations, to many socioeconomic factors, to pandemics. So they need to function under stress. So these are kind of 5 dimensions we think are at least necessary to be able to say something about the sustainability of a food system. And this is what we want to work with you, what we want to explore with you today. So first we want together to understand the complexity and interlinkages of food systems. Then we want to learn about the concept of food sustainability. We want to get familiar with the methodology of food sustainability assessments, and then also apply the methodology ourselves in groups. And if we have the time, think about possible interventions and leverage points within food systems. Yeah, but first I would like to explain a bit how we understand food systems in our research. So we have here, in the middle, we have something that's like the value chain. You can see it goes from input supply from the left to food production, processing, packaging, distribution, consumption to the right. This is what we call like the operational food system, the value chain, but all the actors and activities that are connected to that. And this is kind of embedded into this green part, which is the natural resource part of the system. So there's soil, there's water, there's biodiversity, but we can also think of air and others. So there's the natural resources. And then we have this yellow part, which is all the information and services like research, extension, financial flows, logistics, everything that makes the food system work and that flows into it and influences it. And this again is embedded in what we call the political subsystem, where we have laws and policies like legislation, rules, regulations that also are an important part of the food system. Just think of trade regulations or agreements and topics like that. So it's not only the value chain, it's much more than that. We also have to take into account these other things. And if we look at that in terms of a practical example, this is from my own research on soybeans, on soybean-based food system in Bolivia, where we can also see here this operational food system part, which is only part of it, but we can see here it goes from the input supply here on top on the left to production, then to harvesting, then to storage. And then it takes like kind of two ways. First, part of the soybean is consumed nationally in terms of edible oils and other products, but then most of it really goes into the global markets and is traded for feed, for meat production, and also eggs and other stuff, of course, but for animal feed. So this is like the functional part of the food system. Now, if we want to look at that in more detail, we can say, okay, we have here this, on this image, we have kind of the value chain from production to consumption. And we can say, okay, if we take the example of avocados, we have here avocado seedlings, then well, maybe I need a pointer or something. Oh, I think you can see. Then a farmer who produces avocados, then avocados are packaged by a farmer or a company. Then a supermarket sells them and family eats them. That's like a very simple way, this part of the operational food system. But then there's the natural resources, which is avocados need soil, they need probably irrigation depending on where it is, and they are pollinated by insects, so they need biodiversity. So this is kind of the operational subsystem and the part of the natural resources that are connected to it. And then we have the political subsystem, for example, influencing avocado trade by public policies, their laws and rules, their regulations, their private sector rules, voluntary regulation, like what we call soft and hard laws. And then in different places, in different countries, we will have different regulations on how avocados are treated and traded in the value chain, how they are imported and exported. And then we have the information and services subsystem, like with referring to knowledge and research and financial flows and logistical services, where we have, for example, extension services that can help farmers to use best practices in avocado production, and then transport companies that can advise on how to bring like avocados from Chile to the US market. Just some examples of how we can approach such a food system based on one specific food item. So now this is our 5-dimensional concept that we use to measure food system sustainability. Here you can see those 5 dimensions that I already mentioned. So we have here on the bottom, we have food security. Then we have on the left, social ecological resilience. We have the environmental performance of the food system. We have reduction of poverty and inequality. And we have the right to food as those 5 dimensions that we are going to measure also now. So how do we define food system? Maybe just to wrap it up, we can say it's networks of actors and activities that are involved in food production and processing, storage, retail, trade, and consumption. And even beyond that. And those networks include direct or indirect interactions with the natural resource base, with the governance context, and the flows of information and services, just to bring it all kind of together. So that can be according to geography. We can conceptualize a global food system, but we can also say we look at a regional food system, say Africa, or we can look at a national food system. We can look at a local food system. And then it can also be according to quality. So we can say we evaluate an agro-industrial food system or an organic food system or fair trade food system, agroecological or based on origin. So we can really use different approaches to how we understand what a food system is that we want to measure. We can say we look at the food system of Berlin, or so we can do that. We just have to find some kind of delimitation of what we look at in our research. Then usually we start with the food system mapping. So when we try to evaluate the sustainability of a food system, it's good to first conceptualize what our food system actually is. We have defined if it's according to place or according to equality. Okay, we're looking at a food system of Bolivia here, for instance, and then we draw food flows, like what goes in and out of the system, places of production and processing, places of distribution, places of consumption. We try to map the actors who are involved, who's influencing, who's working in the food system, who's consuming. Then we try to to get the diversity of the food, to write it up, what food items are there, what types of food, what institutions are influencing it. Then also financial flows and flows of knowledge that are there, like universities who do research on food, for instance, or also corporations who do research sometimes. Then we have the natural resources that are used, and then also the natural resources that are affected, and also people who may be affected by food system activities. And for those who are interested, we've published a description of that process in a paper called Mapping Food Systems, where this is described how we did that in our research until now. We still do that and improve the method. Here you can see some images from these processes. It's really fun actually to draw the food flows. And today we don't have time to do this, but I just wanted to mention that as part of a food system assessment usually. So this is like one example of such a food system map that people did in Sucre, which is a city in Bolivia, where they mapped the city food system and then started to go into the details. Where do we have to do research? And then they really came up with a collective action process that fostered urban agriculture. So now I would like to come to the concept that we are going to use today. When we do a food sustainability assessment in a specific context, we try to gather different actors, like today, people who identify like consumers and others who identify more like producers or like traders or like scientists on food, or in whatever terms we're associated to that specific food system. We bring them together and we use only few indicators per dimension. And that's what we're going to practice today. We have our 5 dimensions here: food security, poverty and inequality, environmental performance, social ecological resilience, and the right to food. And for each of those, we have like 3 indicators. Of course, we can have many, many more, but we reduced it for the practical terms. And when we apply that in the field with people, we can't keep them there for days and weeks. It's just for a short assessment. So you can see here, we have for the right to food, we have non-discrimination, we have access to information, we have effective participation. And then for food security, we rate household food security. We rate power asymmetries or power relations in the food system. We discuss and rate the capacity of the food system to store and process food. We rate in poverty and inequality, we rate the situation of incomes, sources of incomes, so if there's possibilities, and levels if it's sufficient. Then we rate the access to social technological infrastructure, so if people can have the means to do what they for their food related activity, like if the farmers have technology that they need for mechanizing their production, for instance, or to making it efficient, or also in processing food and whatever activity related to the food system, really. And then also if the value chains are working, the performance of the value chain means if it's possible to trade the food, if the food reaches, or if there's really a bridge that's working between producer and consumer. And then in terms of environmental performance, we look at the environmental benefits of the food system for the landscape. So what kind of landscape does the food system create in terms of biodiversity, landscape diversity, but also we can also think of other things. We look at the carbon footprint. We look at impacts on human health. And in resilience, we look at diversity. Can be biodiversity, can be agrobiodiversity, but it can also be a diversity of income sources or a diversity of social organizations. And then we look at if social self-organization is working, if it's there and if it's working. And we look at the traditional knowledge because that's also important for resilience. And in the right to food, we look at discrimination, or in positive terms, non-discrimination. We look at access to information and if there's effective participation in decision making. And we rate each of these indicators on a Likert scale from 0 to 4, where 4 is very good, 3 is okay, 2 is medium, 1 is low, and 0 is nothing or really very low. So high is good, low is bad. And we rate that together in some kind of discussion. We can also use field trips. We can't do that today, but usually we do that. And we use it. We discuss until we reach a consensus in the group, and then we rate that specific indicator. And usually we also note down why we rate it that way. Okay. So sometimes we also, when we use this methodology, we have to describe these indicators, and sometimes we have to draw it. And this is something that we want to practice today also very quickly, not now, but in the group work later. And then here's a more detailed description of the indicators. I don't think I have to go through all of them. I mean, each group will rate one dimension and they will have this description. It's just the examples that I mentioned when I went through these dimensions. And the group facilitators will have this description that you can look at when your group rates one of these dimensions, means 3 indicators. Yeah. So we have one for the right to food, one for food security, one for poverty and inequality, one for environmental performance, and one for resilience. So we can also, what we also usually do is we review if these indicators are really relevant to that food system we are looking at. And we can also do that later in the groups. We can say, is diversity really, or do we need something else? And that can be adapted. It needs to be justified, but it can be adapted. What we usually don't change is the 5 dimensions, but indicators can be adapted or even changed. Okay, so then what this leads to in such a participatory assessment usually is that we have some kind of rating that's many times we just draw it somewhere on the wall on a paper. We don't always have a computer or electricity, and those ratings then, of course, lead to a lot of discussion on how to tackle these weaknesses that are being identified. And that leads then to a co-creation of collective action, which is something we won't get to today because we only have 2 hours. But this is then really something that is also co-created in the group of actors that we get together usually for such an assessment, with those questions with what do we need to change and how do we get there? So what policies, for example, or what actors do we need to work with so that to then really change something in the food system? And this is kind of a concept of how such an overall process can look like. So first we define the problem together, then we integrate natural and social sciences. That's what we do in our research when we investigate like more than those 3 indicators, but really a whole set of questions on the environmental performance of a specific food system. But then what we do today really starts here at step 3, when we integrate or we bring together different food system actors and their knowledge, and then rate together or evaluate the food system sustainability together and define what needs to be changed and how, which is then really a social learning process among actors, where we also rethink about where we want to get to. What does sustainable development of the food system mean? What food system do we actually want as a society or as a group of actors? And then to get to collective action that where these identified weaknesses are really addressed and transformed. So this is a concept of an ideal process in that way. And what is also one step that is optional, but also sometimes very important and interesting, is to do a policy analysis. We won't do that today. Also, we do only part of the method, but this is something that is also a good thing to do, that we discuss together with our group of different actors what policies are in place that support the food system, then what policies have a negative influence on the food system on these 5 dimensions. Where are the ambivalences? Whom would you need to ask to improve the situation, and what do you need to do this? It also points to this transformation of the food system, just to show this as an option for the method. So and then, of course, it's interesting to question policy incoherence. Like when you think of the US food system, for instance, where I think there's like $25 billion every year invested in agriculture, and that's not necessarily the most sustainable agriculture. And subsidies, a lot of subsidies go into high fructose corn syrup, right? Which then cause health impact of sugary diets and costs that are much, much higher than those agriculture subsidies. So this is a drawing from the Washington Post that pointed to this incoherence and said, like, we need a national food policy that could save millions of American lives, and that those incoherences really need to be tackled. So if we, in the process of assessment of food sustainability, we can also analyze policies and their coherence or incoherence, and then point to improvements in those policies. Right. So this was a bit about the context and the method. Now I would like to hand over to Theresa to tell us about how we organize for our group work. Oh yeah, sorry, first she will show us this case study that we will rate and evaluate. Can you unmute? Can't hear you.
Yes, so here I am. So first I would like to introduce to you the US food system. We chose this food system because we thought that a lot of participants today might be from the United States. It's not that we did research in the US food system, so it might well be the case that some of you are much more the expert in this than we are. But still we collected some ideas about the US food system, and I will quickly introduce it so that you have a bit of an overview what could be discussed during the breakout group work. So here you see some facts and figures about the value chain. Here's the example of corn, which is produced, and then it's processed, packaged, and distributed. It's somehow consumed, and some of it might end up as litter. Concerning the value chain, we see that 1% of the population is working in farming. The average of farmers is, the age average is quite high, so it's above 50. And the conditions are very competitive, which means farmers get very low prices for their work. And also, what's quite interesting, half of the workforce in agriculture lacks a legal status, which makes them, of course, vulnerable to bad conditions, bad working conditions, low wages, and all that. Then the US food system is really characterized by large-scale farms. They account for almost 60% of the production value in the US. So not of the amount, but of the monetary value. Then we also see here that around 4,000 calories are produced per person per day. Some of this is from crop production, and others is from pasture and feed for livestock. Then some of this goes to exports to other countries. Some of it goes into animal production. And then we see that at the end we have like 2,500 calories that are consumed per person per day. The people eat a high meat and high sugar diet, and that leads to like a lot of related diseases. So 40% of adults are obese. which means people have a high risk of diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, cancer. Yeah, so many illnesses are related to that. And also we see that 30% of the food supply is wasted. Then here around poverty and food insecurity, I found figures that 35 million Americans struggle with food insecurity, and that this worsened this year during the corona pandemic. So the estimates are up to 50 million who are food insecure. And also households with children are more at risk. Many of them rely on food banks, and some of them really cannot apply for state support because somehow they don't meet the requirements. Then there's an estimated 23 million Americans who live in food deserts, which is defined by low income and low access to food. So people who have low income and are far from food access points, they struggle to get healthy and nutritious food. And then also, as Johanna mentioned before, eating healthy is more expensive than eating unhealthy. So if we look at the natural resources, we can see that cropland is decreasing and groundwater depletion is increasing due to increased irrigation practices. I'm not sure why cropland is decreasing. This might be due to infrastructure or city expansion, but it might also be due to degraded lands which are no longer used. This I don't know. We also see nutrient runoff, which leads to hypoxic dead zones, as you can see here in this example of the Gulf of Mexico. Soil erosion is a severe problem, which you can see here. It's kind of stabilized in the last years, but still it's a high annual loss of topsoil. Then we can also see that pesticide use and genetically engineered crops are increasing. And also, of course, a result of this industrial agriculture model is it's a strong driver of climate change because it's very heavily dependent on fossil fuels. Then for the political subsystem, there are several nutritional programs that should address food insecurity and nutritional aspects. And there are some regulations about, for example, minimum wages. This is state dependent. These regulations also address overtime of the labor force or child labor. But as we saw before, if half of the workforce in agriculture that doesn't have a legal status, it's difficult for them to claim their rights. Then there are several environmental policies that address agricultural production, for example, production practices, then regulation related to crops or animals, energy. Here, as an example, you see organic operations. And now the bubbles look big, but actually they say it's less than 1% of total area, which is in organic operations. Then quickly for the information and services, there are large networks of public agricultural research institutions, and there are also research and development programs of private agribusiness and food industry firms. And here we see that over the last years, the budget for public research kind of declined, was steady, and then it declined during the last years. And we see that the spending of the private spending for research and development actually increased quite a lot. And the same for food manufacturing, this also increased. And there we can also ask questions about what that means for research, if it's privately funded or publicly funded. Here we see the organic food sales in the United States, which we can see is also increasing, steadily increasing over the last years. And with this piece of information, I would like to introduce group work. So in the next 45 minutes, you will be sorted into breakout groups. And we have basically 2 tasks for you there. So each group will first try a graphical explanation of an indicator of your choice. So the indicators Johanna introduced, you can choose which of them is most appealing to you. And then you will do an individual drawing of one of these indicators. And we ask you to be creative and yeah, quickly think about what this means for you and how you would draw that. And then also shortly discuss that in your group. Maybe if you are a very good drawer, then show your picture, or if you had a good idea, show your picture and quickly discuss it with the others. And after that, you will jointly discuss the indicators you will be assigned. So each group is assigned 1 dimension. And keep in mind the different subsystems of food systems. And think about which of the subsystems might be interesting for the dimension you are assigned. And then discuss and agree on a rating, and also give some reasoning for this score. So now I see we have 33 participants. So I would suggest that we only have like 1 group per dimension. What do you think, Johanna? Because I think otherwise the groups will be too small.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, that's how I organized them, Theresa.
Great, that's great.
And then maybe students, if you just want to, once you're in your breakout rooms, just let the rest of the group know. And then there'll probably be more like 2 student facilitators per group. And then they can hopefully contribute to the conversation as well.
Great. So maybe very quickly, are there some immediate questions that you would like to ask?
So the indicators that have been given to us, I was wondering if you could, send us via email or something like that so that we can all discuss which one we want to take in the breakout groups.
Yeah, the group facilitators should have them. If somebody doesn't, let me know. I can send it.
Sure.
But they should be available to each group.
All right, we're back. Godwin, I'm so curious about what the Idea Maps Network is. Welcome back, everyone. So Theresa and Johanna, take it from here.
So thank you everyone for participating in this. I hope you had interesting discussions.
Oh yes, we were interrupted in the middle of the discussion about outcome and property indicators.
So Johanna, if you want to share your screen,
Yes,
and then we can,
do
start to collect your ratings.
Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I would suggest that we go through group per group, and they will tell us their ratings. If there's just 1 rating for a dimension, it doesn't matter. If we have 2, well, that's even more interesting. And we can just go through the groups. 1 to, how many groups do we have? How many groups are we? 5. 1 to 5. And as we have not much more than 15 minutes. So please just tell us your rating for each of the indicators, and maybe the most important issue that came up in the discussion. It can be on the, like in our case, it would be conceptual, but in others, maybe it's about a specific topic, just 1 major issue that you discussed in your group.
Okay, so we start with the food security then. That was in our group. Daniela, do you want to?
Yeah, so for indicator number 4, we gave the US system a 0.
Which is indicator number 4? Is it household food security, power, or?
Secure the household level, yep.
Yeah, so that was what?
That was a 0.
A 0, wow.
We gave power relations a 0.5. We were feeling generous.
Wow, okay.
And then for capacity of the food system, also a 0.5.
All right, and what was the major issue?
Yeah, I will contextualize our scores by saying we were having a difficult time just really kind of narrowing the scope of our assessment. And so we decided that our audience for this score, like what was the purpose of this exercise? And we imagined that it was going to the incoming US leadership to think about our assessment of the food system. And so in that context, we thought a lot about the way that power is distributed and how in the US there's like such massive capacity and security for some, but it severely lacks for others, and that really is kind of this like central issue in the system.
Perfect, thanks. Theresa, do you want to go on with moderating this part so that I just take notes of this?
So who was in the group of the right to food? Just speak out and tell us.
I'm gonna talk even though I wasn't facilitator. I'm Tiff. So for right to food, for the non-discrimination indicator, we gave it a 1.75. And for access to information, we settled on a 2. And for effective participation, we were in the midst of our discussion when we got jettisoned back to the main room. So I think if I did our math correctly, it would end up being a 1.25, because we had some discussion sort of participation at, I guess, at the state level versus the federal level. And that's where we were with that, so.
And what was like the most striking point in the discussion, or the most
I don't know if there was one striking, I mean, I think, well, I noticed that gender came up a lot and thinking about discrimination, access to information, and participation. So I think that seemed to be a common thread. Definitely thinking about geographies, again, sort of like local versus state versus federal, and how these patterns, the indicators might change over those types of scales. Yeah, I think those were the main things.
Great, thank you. So the next group was poverty and inequality. Who would like to report on
that? I wasn't one of the facilitators, but we had both of those dimensions, and we actually didn't get to the poverty and inequality at all, like drawing or discussing the indicators. So we don't have any numbers for that.
Okay, was there no group that discussed the?
Well, our group had both right to food and poverty and inequality, because we had 2 facilitators and they had one had been assigned one dimension, one had been assigned the other. And so we thought we would have time to discuss both, but we did not.
Okay.
Can I make a quick suggestion? Maybe just repeat, because you guys kind of combined your conversation, maybe just repeat those numbers for that dimension, just in order to complete the graphic.
Oh, repeat the numbers and use those as a surrogate for poverty and inequality?
Just because you seem to have combined the 2 topics.
Kind of. Okay. So I don't have the list of the indicators for poverty and equality in front of me, but
I think Johanna has it.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
but they're quite different, so I don't know if it's
same numbers. The first one was 1.75.
We can just skip it and go to the next dimension.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if I'm comfortable using the same numbers.
Yeah.
Because they're really different. I mean, there's discrimination and so on, which is really different from like sources of income, and yeah.
Just a little American pragmatism at work. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, so then the next would be environmental performance. Who had this one?
Okay, so I was facilitating that group, and we rated first. First, we had a discussion on human health. We thought that this should be rated really in the food security dimension. So we kind of shifted this responsibility to the other group without telling them. But that's what happened. So it's assuming that we are rating all the dimensions, we would have rated that in the other dimensions. And we replaced that with the issue of water, right? And water in the US food system was rated really, really low by the group, 0.5, because of many, many bad issues there. Then we also rated carbon footprint, also with a 0.5 because of many known problems. And then the food system landscape, also with a 0.5 because of lack of biodiversity and monoculture, thinking of birds and butterflies disappearing and so on. So this was really poor, you could say.
Thank you.
And the issue that we discussed most was really that in that framework, we have indicators that are more like a property of the system, like resilience, and others that are more an outcome of the system, like household food security. And we had this discussion, which we did not finish, if this is possible, if we are mixing too much, like apples and oranges.
Great. So the last one, resilience. Resilience.
Bruce, when you came into our group, you asked me what my facilitating role was, and I said resilience. But because we had 3 facilitators from 3 different groups, we ended up talking about environmental performance. So we didn't do the resilience, we did environmental performance.
Well, that's actually okay, because I think another group took the same topic.
Oh, okay.
So let's have your ideas and thoughts about the environmental performance, and then maybe we can compare the two.
Yeah, so we gave landscape management a 1. Carbon footprint was 0.5, and health outcomes were a 1. And we mostly discussed for the carbon footprint just how the U.S. has we produce so much animal products, and the methane produced as a byproduct of that process is a more potent greenhouse gas. There's heavy reliance on global transport to import the food that we need. And also we waste 30% of our food supply, and most of that goes to landfills where more methane, which again is a more potent greenhouse gas, is released.
Okay, in this case, I would have to add another indicator here because we cannot put health and water together in one, but we're not adding more indicators right now. So I'm leaving this just empty for the moment.
Okay, so I think this is very interesting. And it seems to me, I mean, unless there is some ratings that we haven't discussed, if there is anyone who discussed another indicator that we have not heard yet, then please let us know.
Yeah, so our group discussed the resilience indicator, and we gave diversity a 2. And that was an interesting discussion because we really looked at how broad a spectrum diversity was, and like everything that was encapsulated in that. So it was kind of hard. Some things had a higher diversity, some things didn't have as high diversity. So we kind of compromised on a level 2 rating. And then for social self-organization, this was another one that was very heavily debated in our group. Not debated in like a negative sense, but debated in like a, there's just kind of different ways we could look at that. And social self-organization, we were just a little bit unsure about kind of what that indicator meant and where you were going with that. But we gave it a 2 because we believe that there is kind of like a strong social, we gave it a 2 because there is the sense of community in the United States. There's all of these pockets of communities that have a lot of trust and community within them, but a lot of times those communities are at odds with another community. So there's sometimes differences in collaboration. So it can be difficult for those communities to collaborate with each other. However, looking at the overall United States, we just decided to give that a 2 because there's polls on both sides. And then our last indicator we had the most consensus over, which was knowledge and identity, where we really discussed how, first of all, like a really great point that was made by Karina was that due to COVID-19, a lot of the people with the wisdom and the knowledge are dying because they're in vulnerable groups. And so we're losing a lot of that knowledge and identity in COVID. And on top of that, like there's just kind of with technology and current trends, we're just really distancing ourselves from traditional ecological knowledge and ancestral knowledge. So we were all pretty much in agreement that that was going to be a 1.
Thanks a lot. It's a very interesting picture here, I think. And I think interesting discussions. And I see in the chat that there are some questions also, like how we came up with this, with these main indicators and the dimensions. And I think for this question, I pass over to Johanna because you've been there during the whole process. So I guess you can give us some more information on it. And then we also have here in the chat the topic of gender. So that's something we also discussed in the group. And someone says, Karina says, when working with the different actors, ideally all participants should have the opportunity to rate all 15 different indicators. Or do you recommend the breakout groups as well as we just did? So, I mean, typically you would discuss these indicators with food systems. And usually it's not like a national food system, but you would be like more local. And I think that also makes things much easier because if you have a more specific food system, a local food system, it's easier to define the boundaries of that food system and really to talk about the things. They might not be as diverse as on a national scale. And so we also made the experiences in Chile last year that it's actually much more difficult the broader the system you define, the more difficult it gets to really rate these indicators. But Johanna, maybe you could say something about the process of how this was determined.
Yeah. Yes, maybe just very quickly. It was a process of co-creation of the whole concept from the start. And that's also why it is so, yeah, maybe a bit messy like it is, but we co-created this in Bolivia and in Kenya together with academic and non-academic stakeholders. And we started like, okay, with different food system actors, like what is important in the food systems to be sustainable. And then we kind of collected everything and said, okay, we can use this and we can include this and this works and this doesn't. And so little by little, we came up with these 5 dimensions, which is a consensus on what the food system needs to be, that we can call it sustainable. And of course, I mean, this entails a specific understanding of sustainability and also of the other things that are in there. But yeah, we can say that it has been discussed among different actors and it can be rediscussed and improved, but this is where we stand now. And the same with the indicators. So first we did I would say a more academic assessment of these 5 dimensions, which was like disciplinary and interdisciplinary, where we defined indicators, but we then had more than 70 in total. And we measured all those indicators and we put them together and we rated them together quantitatively and qualitatively. That's why we chose this Likert scale, because there we can put 0 to 100% as well as from bad to good, which can really combine these qualitative and quantitative numbers. And so as we had that, we thought that it's much better if this is a tool that can be used also without scientists, people who want to assess the strengths and weaknesses in terms of sustainability of their food system. And that's why we sat together again with all those actors from the start to say, what are the basic indicators that we need for those, or that have proven to be like a good description of the sustainability of the food system, with a maximum of 3 indicators per dimension so that it's doable for a group in a day or something. And this is what we came up with. And that's why we're saying in the tool that is currently under elaboration, that the dimensions should be those 5, but the indicators can be adapted and contextualized and replaced and always come with their description. So when we rate power relations, what do we rate? What do we understand? And how do we rate it and why? So it always needs a description with it. And that's what we did like in 7 countries so far. And yeah, it's interesting how it evolves and develops. No, it's constantly being adapted, but this is where we're at right now. It's a co-creation process.
Great, thank
I
you.
love it. Thank you. Thank you. Theresa, do you have another?
Yeah, I have just one
thing you wanted to
last
add?
question, and then I will hand over to you, Bruce, to really close the session. So there is this one question from Claire who asked, how do you manage power dynamic between stakeholders within these breakout discussions? And the fact that some stakeholders can't or don't have the power to participate in an activity that happens at a specific time and place.
I don't think we can answer that in 2 minutes, but it's a task that we have as researchers who want to be facilitators of transdisciplinary processes, that we make sure that actors are on the table that usually might not meet, right? And the negotiation of the rating is really sometimes not as easy as it was right now in our group. Maybe I don't know how the other groups were, but it is really difficult. But often we have actors at the table who are interested in the sustainability of the food system. So those who are not at all interested in that sustainable, they usually don't show up, even though we invite them. So those who are there, actually, they have some interest in the topic. So that it's usually constructive, even though there's a lot of negotiation. It's a difficult and important process, I think.
Yeah, thanks. And I mean, of course, to close here for our part, this is now been done on perceptions today, but of course you can also do these assessments with like really scientific assessments where you collect numbers and have more, if you want to say so, solid facts, but I wouldn't say perceptions are not solid. I think they're very important and also give a good picture, but there are different ways of how you can do such an assessment. And unfortunately, time is running out, so I hand over to Bruce now.
Great. Thank you, Theresa. I love this. I love this as a sense-making process of such a complex system. As someone who studied collaborative processes, it's often separate the science from the stakeholders, but this is a way to kind of get the knowledge in the room. I just think it's fantastic. And it's going to be something that is available to you guys. So we're going to post the video of this workshop and the supporting materials, as well as a short article by Johanna and Theresa that's going to talk about the process. So this will be a package that you can implement, hopefully, with the necessary tools, both online and in person. And that's the idea, is to have you get news you can use here. So we're going to publish it in the Social Innovations Journal coming up, and we'll give you a notice of when that happens, when you can access that stuff. So our next workshop is next week. It's next Monday, and it's called Mobilizing Collective Agency Through Technologies of in Transformation. And Hallie Eakin is one of the presenters. She had to step out. She was here a second ago. She's going to present it with a bunch of her colleagues at Arizona State and other fun places. And they're going to be teaching us about tools to raise your awareness of your actual and potential social ecological agency. So it's not only your awareness, but others, and they call this ego nets, and another tool they call avatar. So these are about how do you actually mobilize collective agency and intentions around this stagnant sustainability challenge. So a really cool tool around sort of personal agency. So signups are still available for that. So go to our website if you'd like to attend. And if you have other things that you'd like to present or like to see here, please do get in touch with us. We'd love to hear from you. I'll put my own email in chat. And if you'd like to send me a note of something you'd like to see happen or something that you'd like to offer through the Transformations Community, I would love to hear from you. And I hope to see you next week and we'll also send an update on the conference, which is going to be coming up next year. And so that's what we got. I'd like to thank our presenters for doing this great presentation.
And thank you all for participating.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Yeah. And also thank Ashley and our discussants from CU Boulder's MENV program. And if facilitators, if you could stay on for a moment for a quick debrief, as well as our presenter, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll see you soon.